Renewable energy, another viewpoint on picking stocks. According to Jeff Siegel at Green Chip Stocks, we are at the dawn of a new age in energy. The days of alternative and renewable energy quietly playing out as a niche market are coming quickly to an end. Jeff and I have had numerous conversations on the subject, and there is no doubt in my mind that he's dead on right here. This is the interview that I conducted via phone to his office in Baltimore, Maryland. Craig Shields, let me begin by asking you where you see the renewable energy industry going generally. It looks to me that there are a couple of dozen technologies here, all competing for space in the overall pie chart of energy consumption. If you were a betting man, which ones do you think are going to win? Jeff Siegel, I don't think it's a particular technology. If you take that pie chart, and coal has a chunk of the pie, natural gas has a chunk of the pie, and oil has a chunk of the pie, and then you have renewables. Within that wedge for renewables, I think you have any number of things that fit into it, but they all still make up that one wedge. There is no one type of renewable energy that's going to take the lead. It's going to be a combination of all that we have available to us now and in the future. CS, okay, I guess that's one way of looking at it. What do you see are the guiding factors to the success of renewables generally? Why aren't we there now? JS, that's a good question. There are a number of reasons. At the risk of playing the conspiratorial card, if you want to talk about transportation fuels, everything that we have today is designed around this oil infrastructure. We have gas stations all over the country, so you have this trillion-dollar infrastructure already in place, and you can't just walk into the room one day and say, okay, I have this really great technology, it will be more efficient, it'll allow us to have a transportation fuel that's not going to be so polluting, it's going to help the economy, but the only problem is there's no infrastructure set up for it. You can't just go up to the gas station and do a quick charge for an electric vehicle. Back in the day when cars had just come out, there were battery electric vehicles that competed with internal combustion engines. There were vehicles back in the day that went 20 to 30 miles on a battery charge. But essentially, the ICE, internal combustion engine, won out. As far as utility-scale generation, coal is cheap, and one of the main reasons it's so cheap is that we never really figure into the equation the liquidation of our natural capital. We can brush aside mercury in the water or pollutants in the air. No one asked us to pay for that, so we think of it as cheap. But what if you really had to break it down? Say a coal-fired power plant operator had to pay not just for the coal, and the mining of coal, and the transportation of coal, and the liquidation of natural capital that happened along the way, whether it's mercury in the water or greenhouse gas emissions. And what about moving the coal? You move coal either by rail or by truck, so that requires oil. It's either diesel or gas that's going to move the truck. There are so many little components involved there, and if you really broke it down, maybe coal isn't so cheap. We've never had to pay those prices. So, it's easy to say, well, the economics of coal make sense. But technically they don't. But the problem is we don't pay the real price. CS, that's precisely right. Internalizing the externalities, as it were. JS, right, absolutely. And the good thing is I think more people are starting to at least consider that. I've noticed, I would say 5 or 6 years ago when I brought that up, you could hear crickets chirping in the room. Now people are saying, oh yeah, I have read Natural Capitalism, or I understand this. People are reading more about it and at least considering it as a valid argument, because it is a valid argument. CS, right. Well, let's look at this from a financial perspective for a second. I want to get into the core of who Jeff Siegel is and what's made him successful. So, your ability to analyze good and bad bets, as it were, within the green sector, is based on what? What analyses do you deploy, and what makes those more successful and more accurate than somebody else's? JS, I don't know if they're more successful. Anytime you analyze a company or a stock, I don't think it's really any different doing that for renewable energy than anything else. When I started out at Agra, I learned how to do this from some of the smartest guys in the business. I mean, I sat and watched and read their stuff and learned how to do it. I know quite a few people who invest but don't really do any research on the company or the market in general, and I've never really understood that. Most of the people that are successful in this business take the time to do the research, not just read about things, but going to visit the companies. Go visit the competitors. See what's going on in the space. You know, when we first started Green Chip, we were one of the first letters around to cover renewable energy. And since then there have been a great number of new ones coming out and launching their own letter. And some of them are successful and some aren't, but the ones that are successful look at these things on a company-by-company basis, or maybe they'll just look at policy, but they won't look at supply and demand. There are so many things that you have to consider with any investment. When we look at renewables, we treat it like anything else. I've long been a self-proclaimed environmentalist. I've long been a supporter of alternative energy. I believe in it. But when I look at it from an investment standpoint, I ask, okay, what do we have in front of us? We have the rapidly diminishing supplies of all our fossil fuels, not just oil, but coal and natural gas. Even with new natural gas finds, you don't know what the production rates are going to be. So you have fossil fuel depletion, and environmental impacts which are real. I mean, we can sit and argue and debate stuff all day, but in the end, if you can't drink the water and you can't breathe the air, then you've got to make a change. And if people want a glimpse of what it would be without environmental regulation, go to China, and you'll see firsthand just how bad it can be. And on top of all this, you have the economics of energy that are starting to be exposed for what they really are. And I think that kind of ties in with the depletion of fossil fuels. We can start to see that now with oil, and I believe we will see that in another 10 to 20 years with coal. People will realize that we don't really have a 250-year supply. The USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, says that there is a 100-year supply. I would suggest that it's even less. CS, okay, but how can you tell a good renewable energy investment from a bad one? JS, if I look at a solar stock, I'm going to look at the technology, I'm going to look at funding, I'm going to look at sales, I'm going to look at competition, I'm going to look at policy. Some sorts of companies are funded so well that maybe they're not going to live and die by policy as opposed to some other ones. I also look at where they're based. Except for First Solar, I really wouldn't touch a US solar company right now, because the Chinese simply manufacture solar faster and cheaper than anybody else. Now, I'm not saying Chinese solar is better. I'm just saying, strictly from an investor's standpoint, that I have to go where I know who is going to deliver at the end of the quarter. And if I compare most European or US solar manufacturers to a Chinese solar manufacturer, just on a cost basis, it's a no-brainer. You have to take all those different kinds of things and put them into the equation. When I first met with the Green Chip publisher, They asked about the difference between investing in renewable energy and investing in anything else, and really there is no difference. You just have to do your research. And I really believe in going that extra mile, even though it can be a pain in the neck sometimes. If I have to go look at a geothermal power plant in Idaho, flying from Baltimore to Utah and then driving from Salt Lake City to Raft River is not a fun day. But I've been in this business a while, and one thing I've learned is that some of these companies will tell you anything, and that most of the time you have got to see it for yourself. I've talked to companies that had this great technology or that were building this power plant, and then I go to visit and there's nothing there. It's planned. You just can't be afraid to get your hands dirty. CS, wow, that's very interesting. You bring up a great point about the international versus domestic scene. Let's take those, one at a time, if we can. You know, I had the pleasure of meeting Matt Rogers, the assistant to Energy Secretary, Stephen Chu. And I must say that I'm convinced that if there isn't something done in the public sector to create a level playing field, I don't think this is ever going to happen. What do you think has been the role, and will continue to be the role, of the public sector in stimulating this migration to renewables? JS, it's huge. I agree with you 100%. You know, without a level playing field we can't compete. That's just a fact. Take a look at all the subsidies that go into fossil fuels. There is an environmental law research group that put together a list of all the subsidies from 2002 to 2008 for fossil fuels versus renewables. Fossil fuels got something like 3 times as much as renewables, and half of the renewables subsidy went towards corn-based ethanol. You have two choices. You can either support renewables domestically, get them the support they need so that they can compete on a level playing field, or you can pull all subsidies for everything and then you have a real level playing field. But if you do that and everything comes to a crashing halt because all of a sudden your price of food just went up by a factor of 10. We rely on 3,000-mile tomatoes. Without policy support nothing is going to change. I'm a big believer in a free market, a real, true, honest, free market, but I don't think we've ever really had that, at least as far as where it comes to energy as long as I've been alive. To give you an example of this, it makes me crazy when the Chinese were going to come to Texas and going to build a wind farm. That was after how many opportunities that we had here in the United States to do that? We couldn't form the capital for any number of reasons. So the Chinese said, okay, we have the money. We'll come and we'll set up a wind farm in your country and we'll profit from it. And then we said, well, wait a minute. You want stimulus money? We're not going to give you any because you're going to make that stuff in China. Okay, no problem, they say. We'll set up a manufacturing facility right here. Now I'm certainly happy that we are putting people to work. I mean, at this point we need jobs, so if someone's going to employ 300 workers in Texas to build wind farms, I don't care who's going to do it, just make it happen. But at the same time, it kills me to know that because a level playing field does not exist, we would have to outsource not only our workers, but the actual facility as well. CS, right. This was Chuck Schumer trying to put a spear through this whole thing just because the Chinese were involved in it financially. That's unbelievable. We really love to cut off our nose to spite our face. JS, yes, absolutely. And then try to explain this to the people that live there that are still collecting unemployment that would kill to have a job, you know? CS, right. Okay, let me ask you a little bit about your bread and butter, financial newsletters. Who has an appetite for this? Are they individuals? Are they investing their own money? Are they investing other people's money? JS, well, it's primarily individual investors that buy these newsletters. I know that when I first got into this business, I didn't understand it at all. Do people buy newsletters for this stuff? My attitude has always been that if I want to invest, I'll do the research and do it on my own. But I get it now. It's a legitimate industry where a lot of people invest a lot of money and they don't have time to spend their every waking second flying off to check out a wind farm or whatever it is they want to invest in. I've always referred to Greenchip as an independent investment research service. And I do that because I want to distinguish ourselves from a lot of the other letters. It's a tricky industry because, there are a lot of newsletters out there, and I'm not going to name names or anything, but there are a lot of newsletters out there that in my opinion are dishonest. A lot of newsletters are pay to play, where people will come knocking on the door saying, "Hey, I want you to cover my company. In return, I'll give you so many shares of cheap paper." It's very common. I don't want to say the whole industry is like this, but there are certainly people out there that are like that, and it makes it hard for legitimate newsletter writers, because people want to lump you in that category. I've had plenty of people come up to me at conferences and ask, "Listen, what would it take to get my company covered? How much is it going to cost me?" And my response is always the same: we don't get compensated for coverage. People rely on us to do the best job that we can to give them the best investment research that we can provide. And if you start getting into situations where people pay you, you have no objectivity, and people put their faith in something that's not real. So I'm not going to have anything to do with that. The second reason is that I've long been a renewable energy advocate. It's something that's very close to me. If I weren't working in the newsletter industry, I would be doing something else in this space. It's a love of mine. It's a passion. And I would never want to dirty that up by being unethical. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've been really successful. A lot of these newsletters go out of business in a couple of years. We've been around 6 years now. And I think the reason is people have a lot of faith in us. CS, well, good for you, Jeff. This has been great. Keep up the good work. JS, talk to you again soon. For more information on this contributor, please visit http://2greenenergy.com/ renewable-energy-facts-fantasies/